Welcome back to the Women in Movement podcast. I'm here with my friend Anna Grunström, and she is a movement practitioner in New York City. She has a vast experience in movement, dance, fitness, group fitness, pole, somatic retreats, and just so many different places. So, Anna, can you fill in the rest of your bio, or some of it at least?
Sure. I started out thinking I was going to be a visual artist or a musician. That's how I was trained as a kid. I was classically trained in piano and vocal from like the
Mhm.
time I was like 6 or 7 until like I was almost 20. And then somewhere in like high school, I switched my major to dance and I trained Simonson technique mainly, and then along with other like ballet and things like that you had to. And then I was like, I want to go to New York because I had watched that TV show when I was younger, Fame, and I was like the rest of the world just loved Coco and Leroy and everyone. I was like, I want to go to that school. And then I was like, okay. So when I was 20, I moved to New York and I went to the Alvin Ailey American Dance School and I did a 2-year dance program there.
Mm.
Yes. And then after that, I did some personal training. I fell into the world of pole dancing at age 30. And after that, it's just kind of been a mixture of movement, exploration, of, somatic work and mixing it back together with the art that I grew up with and sounds and visual stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of art in your classes through, yeah, sound, music, or visual pieces. You can see how that ties into your history for sure. But I think too, like something that makes you very special as a facilitator is your ability to recognize and really be present in the room and willing to work with all the different energies in the room in such a collective way. Um, but also to see the like how the body is responding in a somatic way as well as just the lines that you're looking for in the dance or the the seamlessness in the choreography. I think you really recognize how others' bodies are responding to it. No.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I was trained as a dancer, like very classically, like this is before internet, before smartphones. So there was no looking, recording myself, no selfies, nothing like that. And
No tripods?
no tripods. And, old school was very much like you walked in and you did what you were told. And, you didn't do anything else. So if you weren't told to move, you weren't moving. And if you're told to move, you do exactly what was taught to you. And I think I had such a love and passion for dance, but also for just artistically expressing myself, which is why I think, music, singing, visual, it came very naturally to me. It was not something that I um, struggled with a lot. It was like kind of like the first language that just happened to me. I felt much more comfortable um, using that as a way of, and I didn't understand it then that was also a way of for me to process things. And I don't think back then we perhaps thought of it that way. But I was even like my first performance, I think I was 6 years old and I sang like solo in front of, like 100 people. And like I've always been in front of people being able to perform my art, whether that's been singing or dancing. So this whole thing is sort of, as I grow older, I'm like, okay, you kind of learn that this is the way to go and this is how you train and all of these things. And then I think I came to a point when, I had finished the Ailey school and because I was old when I started dancing, and old in dance world, it's like I started around as teenager, whereas most people start when they're like 6. So like the age at least at that time was like, it's very different. So I felt like I didn't really have the necessary skills to be able to make it like on Broadway or all of these, great shows or companies. Also didn't have the network. I also didn't look the way that maybe they wanted you to look. We have to remember this is before, again, the internet and all of these things. So even like, auditioning for Broadway, for instance, like there was Miss Saigon, which were Asian people, and I was born in Indonesia and adopted from there to Sweden, but I'm not like this, I'm doing this in quotation marks, but I wasn't that type of Asian. Like I wasn't East Asian looking, so I'm Southeast Asian, so I'm much that didn't really fit in. Like it was very hard lines back then. And then there wasn't really anywhere else on Broadway that you would see a mixed like cast. Most people just look the same. And even if I did like auditions for acting or things like that, it was like, they weren't like, they wanted to know exactly what you look like. Back then it was like if you were like Latina, you had like these tight curly hairs and like you're very light in your skin. If you were black, you were like there was a specific type of black, like there was a specific type of Asian. There was very in the sort of pocket type of thing, and I didn't really fit into any of those. And I know I also didn't have the confidence. I was really down on myself, and I was like, I don't want to dance, I don't want to do this at all. So I kind of just left it, and I was like, I'm just gonna go back to college and just go to college and like find a job. So I think all of these things, when you think about them now, being older and looking back, I also understand in the ways that perhaps I have used dance and art and music, but predominantly dance and physical expression as, I've tried to force my body to be a certain way when it wasn't, when I thought that that's what I had to look like or that's what I had to be, although my body definitely doesn't fit into a lot of the boxes that I needed to check off. So I had to, I couldn't change my physical body, although I wanted to. And then there were other, resistance in my body that just, that was just there. And like me starting to understand as I got older and like had trained for a while and got into pole dancing and just started my own movement journey, I also started to understand, oh, it is not just like the physical body. There's so much in there that's happening. And starting to understand how the body responds in like fear, in different emotional settings, when you feel safe, when you don't feel safe. The things that I understand, like logically from a brain, and I can say, oh, this is not true, but that my actual body, like my somatic body, still has like this knowledge and this desire to like protect me all the time. And that is like how I now look at the body. So it's hard for me to just, I'm really good at compartmentalizing, but so then when I look at people today, when I teach or I instruct, I look at the whole body, not just this is what you should be doing, but I hope at least, so my goal is always to get people interested or curious enough about not just their physical body, but like, how does it, when you step out in the street and there's a car coming, you know that your body's going to be like, don't step out in the street, there's a car coming, right? And like, once we start thinking about ourselves and like all of the different ways that our body protects us, and then we kind of have to do a lot of mental massaging with ourselves. And I think we sometimes, especially in this era when there's so much about like just go, go, go and do, and you should look like this, you should do this, probably even more than when I grew up. It's important to recognize like all of these layers. So I like to remind people about that their bodies isn't just physical. You can't just like tell the body to do this thing, but that you have to actually, do a lot of molding and kind of shaping and its own pacing.
Yeah. I love all of that. I think I had talked about this like 2 days ago, but I had learned this term called small dance, which I just really love. And it's like this idea that your body has a lot of little small dances going on inside of it if you just stand and take appreciation to the different vibrations that are going on and like how things are moving and like your body is always moving in some type of way.
Yeah.
Which is just it's definitely like interesting too and like to tap into that. But I think that like another experience you've had that's different is that you've gone back to Indonesia for the first time. How old were you?
I was 30 days when I was adopted, and I was 45 when I went back.
So when you went back, you had this like very like physical response to being back on the land and the culture and like can you speak a little bit to that like also with your background in music and your background in like dance? I'm sure you were really able to like tap into and attune to yourself in such a different way.
I think first of all, like I think the body is such an amazing, vehicle or vessel or however you want to call it, refer to it, that it does keep us safe, sometimes perhaps in a way that we don't even realize it. And as an adoptee, and especially as a transracial adoptee of color and an intercountry adoptee, like I didn't.
Sorry, real quick, can you just define transracial adoptee for those who...
So a transracial adoptee is a person who's adopted into a family who's of a different race. That is when we speak about transracial adoptees, we often refer to people of color being raised in white families because that is the most common. But you can be a transracial adoptee, not that scenario does not have to happen. It's just like you're a different race. So I am a transracial adoptee of color, growing up in a white family and a white society. And also on top of that, I'm an intercountry, or what some people call international adoptee, which also speaks to a different culture, different language, different customs, different traditions. So for me, I grew up with this idea that, adoption was amazing, it's great. And it wasn't until, a few years ago that whole thing shifted. And in the adopted world, that's, some people call it like coming out of the fog or coming into consciousness. And I think for me, I have done so much somatic work. I remember when I was, and I didn't even think I realized this, but when I first started pole dancing, yes, at first I was like, oh, I'm just doing all the cool stuff and learning. There weren't that many things that were like Superman, inside, outside legging, but whatever.
A few names to things. I still don't remember.
Then I remember being in the studio one day and kind of thinking, well, if the pole was something else, so like how do I really like sort of create a story with this pole? And I had started doing contemporary pole with a company, and it really kind of opened up a completely new way for me of moving with and around the pole that was not the traditional like pole dancing. And it also allowed me to explore in a way that I had not explored my own movement and my own movement in relation to the pole. So and that is really where Unstructured started without me even thinking about it. But I think
Unstructured is the class that you...
Unstructured is the class that I teach. But I think I've done, and with that came a lot of, movement exploration of what can happen here and what comes up, like what's the internal information that is given to me, not just in a physical sense, but like all of a sudden, why do I have this sensation? Meaning like I could be very sad or very happy, or just feel tingling, just like starting to pay attention to those like small things. And that just continued, and yeah, it had its own journey. But I'm bringing this up because I think that was my body's way of kind of inviting me in to say, we're we're getting you ready for something else. But in order for you to do this trip that you're gonna do and that you don't know about, like, this is what's gonna happen. So yeah, I use art, I use sound. I'm very sounds is like something that I feel really called to. Times I think in sounds, like I often, when I see things moving, there is a sound to it. Not necessarily music, but a sound. That's where I like to
Like
make
the
sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sound? Okay.
My internal world is very loud in that way, which I'm very sensitive to sound. Like I don't like really loud noises or loud sounds, but
Which is ironic because you live in New York City.
Yeah, totally. But like the internal is like so much like this. So I think my, the psychological safety, I think, of being an adoptee, and that is a completely different, conversation. But the psychological safety of keeping myself safe definitely was very strong for me. And once that like safety kind of what do you call it, like this kind of clicked open, I was able to like go on this journey and like, okay, what is it like then to go back to my birth country? And I felt very very called to, not as in like in this like I have to go, but it was like this, as if you're being pulled. This is like, again, this, I just felt like something was just being pulled, as if like all of your blood is being pulled in like this one direction, like this,
to your stomach.
Yeah. Like, just like, and you just kind of like, okay, I have to go. So when I arrived in Indonesia, I was very nervous. Had so much anxiety. I missed my flight. I was completely had a panic attack, and I was like, oh, I got on the next plane. They were so kind to me because I don't even know how I convinced, like what I told them. And because I don't know how I missed my flight. Anyway, I get to Indonesia, and I after like 4 days, I stay at this Airbnb. It's outside Jogja. We're next to rice paddies. The owner of the Airbnb. He says, "Do you want to go out with me to the rice field and just kind of walk around?" And I say, "Yeah, sure."
Wow.
So we take our shoes off, and this is, yes, I've walked around, but I haven't actually like stuck my feet into the ground, and I do. And it's like, muddy, like this, rice fields. It's like watery, muddy. It's like, and I have this vision of the mechanics of a clock, of like these two wheels that are like, have been like, still, like for a very long time. And all of a sudden, as I start walking in the rice field, they just start like clicking, like click, click. And it was my first connection to indigenous land. And I didn't know how important that was. I didn't know like that my body could feel a connection to land that way. I had no idea. Like, and while culturally that wasn't, Indonesia wasn't perhaps I felt like, oh, this is exactly what I grew up with. But viscerally, and like at the visceral sense and somatically, I was like, this is where my body belongs. And that was a very big like aha moment. But I think all of these years of doing art and dancing and movement, like I had to have a pretty not big, I would say, just a very identified inner landscape of like, what is the difference of feelings? What are the different sensations? What is different emotion? When are they overlapping and when are they completely different? What do they do to me? What are they how do they make my body react, or how can I use this to my knowledge, and what is the knowledge that I'm actually getting? And sometimes that would take years, and like there's a sensation that would have come back, and then one day you're like, this sensation, I know what this is. I know what this is. So that was very, became very evident when I was in Indonesia.
It's interesting too, because like that sensation of like you putting your feet in the ground actually came from like your ancestors in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, I remember that because of my ancestors did this at some point. So like then sensation could come out generations later in some way. Because it is like, yeah, these are our genetics. This is our body.
Yeah.
It's also really cool because there's so much research around like putting your feet in the ground and like, just how much it grounds you and like calms you down and like activates your brain in all these different ways, and like the actual science behind it is that like the ground or earth materials like give your body electrons, which your body loses electrons when you're stressed mentally or physically. So like that's the sciencey way, but it's also interesting to hear like from a very like your indigenous land was different than like you walking around in bare feet in other places of the world.
Yeah, I mean, because I've been barefoot. I mean, I've traveled half of the world. Like I traveled all over Europe, North America, North Africa, East Africa, Central America. Like it's something like I've been all over. I stepped my feet everywhere. But
and you've danced in so many different.
Yeah, but like this was very, very different. And because I am a very like barefoot, I like it. Like I'm not very much for, if you've seen my classes, I don't really like this whole idea of like this yoga mat and like this rubber thing. I think it's a very strange thing because rubber does take a lot of the vibrations, which is why I do invite people to stand on the floor. So that you can feel it, because rubber is just kind of it kind of numbs, like it just so that's why I don't really like that.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And then shoes get rubberier and rubberier every year. So that was like, that's really cool, and it's led you to a lot of like those physical sensations have led you into a lot of the work that you're interested in now. So can you just tell the audience like a little bit about what you're doing? Like your little like your weekend retreats, and then also your upcoming information.
Yes. So I before I went to Indonesia, I did, and I don't, sometimes I think like we do these things and we don't really know what it is, and like we would love, because we live in the world that we do, we love to just package things up and like just call it something and do it something. But I think, the work that I do is like still in progress. It is to a point where obviously I teach it, and I did way before I left for Indonesia as well. I teach this class called Unstructured, and it started out just at, for pole dancers at Incredible that just wanted to embody their art. That's how I can decide. They just wanted to move. And I said, okay, yeah, I can lead that class. And then it very quickly kind of got into this. I think because of the journey that I was on, and I wasn't quite on the adopted journey just yet. I was just really on this embodiment journey and had been on it, that I was so interested in the merging of our, everyday human being with movement and dance as artists, as human beings, and like in a daily life. That it quickly became this sort of like diving into using these prompts, diving to the physical body as a safe space to explore concepts, ideas, desires, truths, all of these things that we perhaps that's hard to express like in words. So just being able to move with them, not necessarily have to define them or anything like that. And then, as you know, like we share, and that sharing part has always been like a really big part, because I am a big believer that we share because we have knowledge, and knowledge is, it's a privilege to have. And when we have it, I think we should share it. And we have different knowledge, and different knowledge sits differently in different people. So I have taken this unstructured class, and I teach it as a weekly class. I also teach it as intensives and workshops. I've also built upon that and included visual art and creative writing and work with adoptees to explore questions that we perhaps are not feeling encouraged to explore in our regular lives.
Yeah.
And it's always about creating safe space for yourself, safe space in community, where we can do all of these things. And at this point, I also have a mentorship program where I teach other people, or I facilitate, or I coach them on how to facilitate group work, movement work with prompts. And for me, prompts are they're an in to the body, and they're different ins, and the physical body is usually an easy in to get into, versus me saying like, "Hey, Teresa, let's dive into like your deepest sadness." You'd be like,
yeah.
And it's also not what I want people to experience. But for me, it's really about like, okay, let's think about, your right leg. Like, what is the conversation with the right leg? And we never know. Like, there might be a story there. There might be an image. There's a memory. The body holds so many memories and stores so much information that we cannot process in words. So like sometimes it may take weeks until we can actually reflect back on like the experience that came out of the exploration. Sometimes, it's like an aha moment where you can immediately both externalize it in a way that you can interact with it, and then also internalize it, meaning like you can take that information, say, I'm applying this to this is what it means to me. And sometimes it just takes longer. But the important part is to feel safe, to explore, and knowing that it can also stop there. To be like, yeah, my right leg, that wasn't that very interesting. It just does these things, so it's really about like, what are the questions that we ask around it? What are the ins that we are about? Like, what are the stories and the narratives that we hold on to, perhaps, and that we don't realize that we're holding on to?
Yeah, because also I think that when like sometimes that's a prompt, like, well, let's pay attention to our right leg. It's like the only time you pay attention to something in your body is when you're in pain sometimes, or this is an often thing for humans at the moment. Like they only pay attention to like their breath when they don't have their breath, or when you get sick or something. That was one of the things that I took from like your class, which is cool. But I think the second part of this conversation where you're talking about how, like, yes, you might process it that day, or you might process it in 16 weeks. I think that that's also really cool. And going to your classes, like, I've experienced that. I mean, I started taking Unstructured maybe like 2 months into taking pole, and I think it's the best decision I made with taking pole, because it always like kept my like dance alive, and like my own personal style, while you're learning all these techniques and these lines to hit, and always kept things fun. Like last Friday last Friday, I think I even we were doing a couple of different prompts. The first one I got super weird with, the like shapeless. My prompt was to be shapeless, and I like was just never fully entering a shape and just like flailing, which was super weird, but cool. And another one where I was like told to have a conversation with my ancestors, and just started like Irish dancing around the pole at the end after like climbing the pole like a pirate, because I'm Irish. But yes, so like I think that the classes have allowed you to like embody things, and there's also this like this concept of, I think it's, so instead of there's having an imagination, or like something that's an imaginary. There's also something that's like imaginal. Imaginal is like taking on the persona of the thing and really feeling the thing out. Whereas like I've that's happened in all of the classes that I've taken with you, and like every prompt that I've had, I've really like felt the thing, embodied it, and that's how I've gotten stuff out of it, whether it was that day or 16 weeks later, and journaled it. It's been a wonderful process. So it's like, we joke and say that it's therapy because it's like, it is in a way, but it's not like meant to be therapy. It's just meant to be like a portal into this, like, what we don't know what's going to come out in a safe way.
Yeah.
Well,
I can say, like, the work that I do, yes, it's not therapy, but anything will feel therapeutic when you feel safe to explore your truth, whatever that is, that day. And that's different for each person. And also with Unstructured, and thank you so much for coming to class and for exploring and but all of the things that you're saying, right? Like, in this day and age, or often, I think we maybe for all of the time that like we have thought about the body as a marketing or advertising tool, there's a lot of focus on the body. We're very body. The image of the body is very heavily, infused in our lives. But it's very much just about how you look. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a certain way that you should look. And rarely do we talk about the function of the body, or the purpose of the body, that we actually have one. What does it do?
Yeah.
And so on one hand, it's like, so to be in Unstructured and doing these prompts, depending on where you are that day, how you're feeling that day, what you're looking to get out of it, you can go as, I don't want to say shallow as if that doesn't matter, but you can go as kind of in different layers. So you can think about it as like, yes, I can explore my hands if that is the prompt from a physical standpoint of like, what can my hands do? Because honestly, oftentimes we just take the hands for granted.
Yeah.
We just grab things, we hold our phones.
Yeah.
We're not really mindful. We're not like, oh, let me place my hand here. Yeah. Let me pick up a cup. So like, even thinking about the way that your physical, your hands are moving. So, and in dance and pole dance, especially, we're holding on to the pole, or how can we move our hands? How can that add to like our artistic expression as dancers or as creatives? Like, how can we, like there's so much in there, but it's also a channel of like, if you think about it, coming like straight from our heart. Yeah. It's like where people do healing work or massage. It's like, we don't do that with our knees for a reason. Like, we're doing this with our hands. So like, we can go into like, okay, like what's in our heart? Like, what are we actually connecting to? And maybe there's a story or narrative there. Do we want to connect? Do we have a hard time connecting? Are we in a period of time when we perhaps are grieving and we're not open to have that connection? Perhaps our hands, we're just gonna just stay and have a relationship with the physical part of our hands. So I think it's important to look at the body, or not even look at the body, but to feel the body out versus always be like, this is what I should look like. Who cares? Like, you want to know how you feel and how you move, and you can go however deep or not deep, if I put it that way, broad or whatever broad.
Internal and
because we, from I can add this, it looks cool. Yeah. To if I think of this, I'm really connecting like, well, what's in my heart right now, and I'm really feeling like I'm yearning for like connection, whatever it is,
Which is like, it's very true, because there's certain times where like I've gone to class and I've just said like, oh, I just want to like refresh on creativity, or like certain times where we've like dove deep, like there was one class where you talked about desire. So can you also tell the listeners a little bit about like your take on desire? Because I thought that was beautiful.
Oh, wow. So, Yeah, because I think in that class we talked about desire and goals, right? Like, and like, what was the difference about them? Was that where I came at? And I think goals has like this sort of checklist. And again, I'm sort of going back to like, I like to tie the things in, not just to like our personal individual experience, but also like, what does it mean in a larger perspective of in the societal world, in the system in which we are parts of, in the in constellations, in the, all of those things. And we're thinking about desires and goals are often, I think, almost like of an outside kind of expectation. That's something that you should have. Like, you should have goals, and they should be checked off, and there's something that you can actually work towards. But it's like, desires is something deeper. It doesn't necessarily have to have an actual outcome. Like, I have a goal that I want to be a faster runner. Then my checklist is probably going to look something like, week 1, I'm going to run this way. Week 2, I'm going to run this way. And I'm checking those off. I'm going to go into a goal. And it's very much kind of along the like lines of like traditional coaching. Like, what would you like to get out of this?
Like, you need this system, and you need this exercise equipment specifically.
Yeah, but when it comes to our desires, and I think those are oftentimes repressed because we aren't really encouraged to even think about or even ask, what are our desires and what is a desire? Like, is it, that's like this thing kind of in like, I keep making this motion of like this hands kind of like thinking like, I don't know,
pulling something towards you. Yeah. You're like, and
it has like this
grasp that you can't,
that you like, you just feel, and you don't necessarily know what like, what the desire of like what the outcome or what the goal of that desire is,
right?
Other than just the desire itself. And desires are so there's just they're so important because it really, I think of them as like kind of the fuel of like that blue flame of passion. Like that's if you think of like the flame is like blue in the middle and then it's like orange, yellow, and like I think of passion as fire, like it's like really kind of like like this, and desire I think of as just like this constant just pull. But if that constant pull doesn't happen or we don't acknowledge it, then then we kind of just have muted it and we just go into the go and thinking about what is it that I should do versus what is it that I'm actually, my whole body is like yearning to do.
Yeah.
Just different.
Like sometimes like the goal is I want to run because I want to lose weight, because I want to meet somebody. But your desire is really like you want someone to love you and want to be supported. Like that's the real desire. So if you can find that first, sometimes the other things can happen later, or you just like, I don't know, you have a different approach to your goals.
Yeah. And I think like once we look at or like think about them that way, we get less out of like this very traditional step 1, 2, 3, 4, because we're really honest and true about what we desire. It's not just that I want to like, lose weight, or it's not, and there's nothing wrong with these goals either, or if they are desires. But those desires are very important to who we are.
Right.
That we want to be loved, that we want to connect, we want to be seen. My desire me is like that. I want to, live my fullest creative self, and I'm being muted and have to sit in an off. Like, like there's all of these things. And I think once we're more in touch with our desires, it's, it's sort of like being able to listen on those different levels.
Yeah. I also think that it's sometimes hard to tap into that because it's like you don't know what's going to come out, or if it's uncomfortable, or you're like, I don't know if I'll ever have this desire. I don't know if this will ever come out. So it's not always easy to like,
no,
but that's why it's also nice to be doing something like that practice in a group of other people, and like also to not have to talk about it. Sometimes there's times where people go into class, and I've done that where like I didn't talk because you're just experiencing it, and there's so much to unravel there too.
Because it's so much. I mean, we have to remember we work in the non-verbal body, so even to make sense of things, even though we do share and we share kind of like what's come up, but the underlying or like the deeper work that we're doing is not in the 75 minutes that we need. It is in the when we walk out and when we can recognize some of the sensations, some of the ideas, some of the moves in our lives. That's when we're like, oh, this is the work. Because for me, working with the body, yes, when we're together, it is a safe space and we're creating all of these, we're creating this space together, but the work is always, and it never ends. So it's not that we can leave it and then be like, oh, okay, I'm just going to leave this part of me that we're doing, and then I'm going to go out and just do something else. It really, it keeps going. And that is really the beautiful part of this. So it's, sometimes people don't share because they don't want to or whatever, but sometimes they just aren't words. And we also have to remember that they're just aren't words, and that's okay. Anything can come up and anything can be.
Yeah. It's also, someone said this a while ago too, but like language is actually like built from action. So like sometimes you got to act first and then figure out the words for it later on, or like maybe you don't figure out the words for it.
Yeah.
But like, yeah.
That's why I like when I work with adoptees, and I've also done this in workshops, that I've done with non-adoptees, but I do love the visual art because it does allow you to process in a way that is not words, whether the pattern or colors. It has a, you can
like a texture.
Yeah, it has a texture to it. And then you kind of leave it and you can look at it, place it. I usually tell people, place it somewhere you can see it. You may want to add on to it.
So we did talk about how movement is a way into desires and stuff, but it also made me a little curious too, that experience when we had that class is like, there's also times where movement can be like an escapism as a point too. I feel like there's some times where I, in my personal life, was just using movement as like a way to like escape other things that I didn't want to feel, like whether it was being alone or, or yeah, I don't know. It's just like, or it's an interesting concept to think about when, instead of like doing the actual desire, getting the thing, you're using movement. I don't to express.
Well, I think movement can be used for many different ways, and I wish we did it more in our society. Everything has to have like a right and wrong and definition and identification and you have to, but the truth is like, what comes up and what we process is not always does it, like we said, not always does it come in words immediately. We're meaning making people, creatures. We make meanings of the past in order for us to move forward. And I think with movement, sometimes, yes, we can use it as an escape, but I also think that it's the body's way of just wanting or needing that. And wanting to be, I think, as a person who's using movement, being open that all of the movement serves so many different facets of yourselves. It can be a way to just feel good. It can be a way to, obviously like exercise your muscles. It can be a way, it can be an when we're intentional and we're working with prompts. But it doesn't always have to be. And I think it's important to be able to do all of those things. I think of myself as, and I try to explain this even when I do like performance workshops, for instance, when I'm like, okay, we're going to create a piece. It's like you as a dancer or as a pole dancer is not going to be the same as like you creating the piece, because then you're a creator, right? It's also not going to be the same person as like the person kind of resourcing the movements. That's a person like exploring. And then you also have like the observer, which we often are. So if you go back to like Unstructured, you are all of these things at once. You're a person who's resourcing yourself. You're a person who's also as an art in your artistic expression and your pole movement, also resourcing like those you know, maybe not inner resources, but more external resources of what works, what doesn't work. Then you're also the person who explores this and experience, and so you observe and participate at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? So you go in between roles.
It's an active participation.
Yeah. So it's like you have a lot of roles. And then at some point you're gonna be the person making sense of this. You know, which would be maybe right after, and then again it could be 16 weeks later. But movement has so many different, I think what we don't want to do is stop moving.
Yeah.
So if we just keep moving, and yes, it can be an escape, but I think also finding a balance of if it's like over exercising for some people, that's just kind of be seen as an escape, and also asking yourself, what is the body to me, you know, and like finding that sort of happy medium, which can be hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it works as both, and it's good to do both, because otherwise if we were exploring all the time, it would be very overwhelming. And it takes so much time for the body and for us to make sense of things that we need to just keep things in moving. Like we ingest and we digest things, and we do that by moving. So oftentimes the body will just tell you, hey, I need to go out for a run. I need to be like, oftentimes I feel like I need to like this, and I put on really hot, like loud music, and I like punch the air and do all of these things. And that's like, it has no meaning in my life whatsoever, other than just feel really fucking good. That's pretty much all that there is.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have different relationships in movement. And also, you know, you talked about injury before, or like when we have pain. That's just the body's way of saying, hey, we can't do this anymore. Yeah. I remember when I started my adoptee journey, my body, I mean, like, I've been dancing for forever. And that was the first time my body didn't move, like at all. Like I sat or I lay down. Like, so depending also when you're in life, like I had so much grief in my body that it was impossible for me to physically move. The idea of externally expressing myself in any sort of movement was not there.
That you were just taking
it. I just sat. It was like having like just weight in me. And instead of fighting that, like in the past, yes, I would have been like, I need to move, I need to do this. But I had to really honor my body and say, okay, I'm not moving. I'm just not moving. After being a dancer for, I don't know, 40 something years, I'm just, or 20, I mean, I've been alive, but like, I'm just going to sit and just wait. And I did for more than a year. I did not dance. I did not do anything. And because and I just had to, what you talked about before, that like sort of inner dance, I had to just tune in to all of the tiny, tiny movements that was happening in me, that just try to like find the new places they had to be in order for me to then come back and start expressing. Yeah. So that can happen too.
Yeah, I think that like by escapism, I think that was something more so I was using movement for in like the past where I was doing that. Like, but your class helped me to like tune into like what is the feedback I'm getting from my body after I move. So like, yeah, it was just an interesting reflection of like, oh yeah, like I have to be aware of like why I'm choosing to do movement too. And if it is to just punch something for a little bit and like get a good, you know, sweat out and not like yell at someone. that that's what it is for. But like, yeah, tuning into like what my response is to things physically and like verbally in my internal like head was just like it was very powerful. Um uh like so there's also just been so many gems that I felt like brought up in Unstructured, so we could keep going down that road. But one of the things that you've discussed in Unstructured and we've gone over as a prompt was repetition, which I think is really cool. I think also nowadays a lot of people they're always trying to do something new or something different or have a new teacher or a new trainer or like but this beauty of like returning back to repetition and returning back to like either a loop or the same move or the same look. I think that that's super beautiful. And I saw this quote in I think it was like a choreography book. It was an interesting one. A lot of it was like, you could do all this, or you could not. It was like, it was a really cool
So
book.
true.
It was like, yeah. I was like, this is a life book. You could do all this, or not, and you'll be okay. But the quote said, how can you do a movement that you've done over and over again and think you have it perfect or whatever? How can you do it in a way that it becomes awkward again, so you have to find it all over again? And I feel like that just fits in well with like, just my inspiration to do repetition and just like watching you or hearing you talk about repetition and like that there's always little things to find.
Yeah.
Whether it's refining or just like loosening, like
Yeah.
within repetition, that's beautiful.
Yeah. I love repetition. Best thing ever. What I love about it is that it allows you, if you are open to, I think the key to repetition is to find curiosity. Find curiosity in general is it's pretty much the goal of Unstructured, whether that's curiosity about a body part, the whole body, movement, yourself. But in repetition, we tend to do things that we already know, so we take them for granted. But then, like, how can we find something new in there? And once we start creating, what we do by repeating or doing also in structure by not repeating, but what repetition allows you to do is to create a new awareness. And once we have a new awareness, we can also make a different choice.
Choicefulness.
Yeah.
I like
Yes.
that.
And that choice is, that's important. And then we can think about that in our regular life too. Like we get stuck in the rut. We're doing the same thing over and over again. What is we want to just change things. Why can't just life change? But how can we then apply that curiosity to that same repetitive thing? Is there some newness that we can find in there? Is there something that we can be curious about in the things that we are repeating over and over again in order for it to all of a sudden it's gonna kind of branch out into a new thing? But there has to be enough awareness created in order to shift it.
Yeah.
We can't just shift because we say so. It has to be, this is where I can go.
Yeah. I like that. Real understanding. Like repetition would be full understanding. Which kind of goes into like, because I feel like if you are doing a lot of repetition, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of gathering of knowledge.
Yeah.
Like you were talking about,
Yeah.
like you're gathering data.
Yeah.
And this is something we were talking about earlier before we had started, which is a beautiful conversation. So I definitely want to bring this up, but about the way when you're facilitating that you make sure that whatever prompt you're using, whatever space you're deciding to go into or enter into, that you've gathered enough knowledge as you can before you enter that space, because you don't always know how other people's bodies are going to respond, but you try to have as much knowledge as you can to respond in like the best way that you can. And I always have been fascinated by the way that you ask questions when individuals give feedback in class. And it's just been beautiful to see how you pull things out of them with very little words. And also like, yeah, they don't even, and I've experienced this too. Like, I didn't even know where our conversation was going to go because like you just were so good at like listening and being there and pulling it out, but also knowing like there's so many different areas like that prompt could have gone for that person.
Yeah. There are many ways that prompt could go. Yes, I believe that, and I said this also to those people that I've worked with, that you can only take other people as far as you've gone yourself. And it is your responsibility when you work with people in no matter setting, but especially when you work with movement, nonverbal, you know that things can open up perhaps in ways that you didn't expect. And just the idea of exploring in the body is vulnerable in itself. So you also have to, I believe, have really walked that path for yourself many times over with many different outcomes. And I have. And so when so not that I'm saying that I know more. I don't go in with that mindset. I go in with, I have probably more experience because I've practiced this a lot more. So I know how I work, like kind of like where I can go. And I trust that you're an expert of your body, you know best. So I'm not trying to like put my experience on you or tell you where to go, which can be, a little bit of a, it feels like, I'm inviting you into this space, into this container, if you want to call it that way, and we explore together inside here. But I wouldn't invite you into this if I hadn't done this work myself. And I think that's really important for anyone who does this type of work when we're working with prompts and we're asking people how, if it's just from a physical standpoint, like, hey, we're going to prompt, like, let's just do body waves, fine. But if it is a way where you're interested in how what comes out of that, and maybe like, oh, like we want to talk about grounding, we want to talk about connection, relationship in the body, we want to actually embody. If you want to talk about embodiment work and somatic awareness, you have to have not just done, like not just explored. You should also have, read a lot of books, practice with lots of people.
Not the Instagram stories.
Yes.
Actual stories.
Yeah. You should have been mentored by other people who have more experience and who have mentored you, who have guided you, who have led you on this path also, so that you can lead others. And going back to this, I think that that's a responsibility that any facilitator should have. And do I know what's going to come out? Absolutely not. But have I prepared myself in the most that I can? Absolutely yes, for each class. So even though with Unstructured, yes, we're just working for prompt, and I teach them other class where I have to hang myself upside down and do 5,000 things. The class that I prepare for the most, mentally, energetically, spiritually, creatively, it will be Unstructured. Mm-hmm. It's something that just takes time. It takes time for me to prepare for it. And it takes time for me to also close it out for myself as I come home. And that was something that I had to sort of learn the hard way. When I started out, I would be completely floored as I came back from class. And I would go home and it would be same thing at the Old Incredible, 6:15 to 7:30. And I would go home at 8:15 and I would sleep from 8:30 until the next morning.
Oh my gosh.
So I had to start understanding, how do I use my energy? So I did a lot of work with a person who, an energy person who taught me a lot about my own energy, how to gauge, how to feel people out, how to feel myself out, what I hold and what I can hold without opening up. So I have to do a lot of that work as a facilitator. So while I have to have what I consider like just basic coaching skills, basic skills in listening and being able to ask questions without leading you on something or telling you where to go. I'm genuinely curious about, whether it's you're about your hand or you're talking about your grandma or whatever. And that is the conversation that you want to have, and being able to really kind of invite other people in the world. Like, what is the commonness that we have in all of this? What is it that we are all into this? Because you have your experience, the person next to you has a different experience, and so does the other 10 people in the room. But what of all of this do we have together? How does that connect to the world that we actually live in, not in this little space? And I think for me, that has been I think that's when I think back again of all the work that I have done with myself, but also in groups that I participated in, teachers that I've had, mentors that I had, I had to do that work a lot on my own before I could actually hold that space for other people.
Yeah. I think that, it shows. It's just like in a beautiful class. It's a beautiful space. Like, it's not something else someone talked, like you've made it a place. It's not just a space for people to enter. It's a place that people go. Right. So people get excited about the class and the time and people and the class, the community that it's formed. But also, you spoke briefly on this, like your skills of listening. Can you go in on your three ways that you describe listening as?
Yeah. So I talk about, when we're listening, to something, like you and I are talking, and this kind of goes back to the desire. Like, if we go back to the example of desire that you said, and you talked about, like, I want to lose weight. I want to lose weight because so what we hear is like the words that you were talking about is like, I want to lose weight. And I hear what you're saying, but then there's something underneath that, which you said. And the second one is like, we're listening, for something else. We're not just listening to the words that you're saying or to the movements that are coming out of you, but what else? Energetically and just intuitively, what else are you saying? So I want to lose weight because I want to find someone, right? Or I want to meet someone and I want to feel good, or whatever it was that I said. So that's kind of hearing the second layer of something that you're not telling me straight up, but saying, I want to go exercise or whatever. But you're saying a lot of things with just saying that. And that's not the same for each person, but just tuning in to kind of like how you have moved, what you have expressed in the past, what is the intuitive sense that I hear from you. And then what is like that sort of bigger sense that comes out? Like we're going into like that desire, or maybe perhaps even the fear of not being able to fulfill that desire. And that is me listening with all of me to all of you, which is not your words. It is not like the goal that you're saying, but it is what I hear and what I feel, which may be very different than you're saying, I want to have a new exercise regimen, from saying, I am, I'm just taking an example. I fear that I will never, be loved, or like, I desire that this, but I fear that, like, that is what, like, the whole me understanding my whole body with your whole body. So like, I hear you, I listen to you in many different ways. And that's how I think about when I listen. And we're not always gonna deep dive. We have to, again, it's an energetic exchange in which you said, sometimes I don't share. And there's a reason why you don't share, right? Like sometimes, yes, you haven't gotten to the point where you don't even know what to say, or it doesn't make sense to you. But sometimes you just don't want to. And that is I'm allowing, like, the idea of Unstructured is to allow people to explore and to experience and to take whatever they want with them. Sometimes that can be a lot for people, and sometimes they just want more. It can be just that day. Everyone is different, and I trust that you'll take whatever you want. So I want to be able to hear people, not just like what you say, but also all the other layers that come with it.
Yeah, there's so many layers that come with listening. So many layers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's a very important skill to have.
Yeah, but even like, so like,
Yeah.
we can think about listening to music. Like I can listen to the just the bum 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 bum, bum you know? And then I can listen to like, ooh, what else is there? You know, what else can I play with? Is there, you know, it's like there a sensation that comes up? Is there some sort of texture? But on a deeper level, this music is not just about the words. It's not just about it has a deeper level of like a yearning, a desire, a rejection, you know, all of those things. So listening in many different ways is, I think it's fascinating, but I had to do that for so many years for my own body and still does. And I think that is what I personally take away the most for myself of like what I learned about my own journey is to listen. Like I said, my body said, we are not moving. And I'm like, we are not moving. And as hard as that was to hear the larger story in there,
Yeah.
then I just want to say, okay, I'm not moving because I'm sad. Cool. But why I was sad and what came up with that was a whole different ballgame. That was like, okay.
Yeah.
But I needed to hear it. So
yeah. I mean, there's times after a class too where you're just like, I'm not moving.
yeah.
My heart's beating so fast, but I'm not moving. That was a lot. Yeah. I mean, in small dosages, I've had that, not to your extent.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to listen to, but it's important. Yeah, so there's also something like we could just keep going with unstructured all day. But there's something that like there's something too. There was this other one that I wanted to discuss with you that was intuitive versus smart, because I thought that that was a very interesting conversation too. Like we have these intuitive decisions or these like smart decisions that we have to decipher between, like choosing sometimes whether we go with the smart one or the intuitive one that like feels good at the moment is interesting to like navigate between.
Yeah, right.
I don't
say about that. Do you remember like what we did as a prompt?
I cannot remember, but it was a very interesting I can't remember.
So I think about intuitive and like choices in general, like what we choose to do is like sometimes we have to just, you know, kind of do what's best for you in a sense, and it's based on, you know, where, you know, what the situation is and also what's going to make you more safe, like a lot of times. You know, and but intuitive decisions for me are, you know, the ones that we don't have to, it doesn't go so much here. Oftentimes we do a lot of pros and cons.
Yeah.
Of like, what should I do? What's the good? What's the bad? All of those things. And with the intuitive decisions are often perhaps even the ones that are bigger, not like the small everyday kind of, or everyday even in movement, but like the larger ones of kind of surrendering into something like a different way that we sort of dare, that we're being called to, that we're being pulled to,
like that desire too. I guess
it's a lot of desire.
I guess we could go back to the desire versus smart. The smart could be the goal, and maybe it's like both of those are together.
For sure. Yeah. Because a lot of times it is like when we think of Unstructured and when I work about Unstructured, it's they're the same things coming back in different ways. When we think about desires or intuition or want or awareness and shifting, like it's all really about listening to ourselves and being able to be curious about what it is that our body is telling us.
Yeah.
And then from there, how do we then, apply that into our lives? And because whether that is, we call it desire or we call it something else, but it is like that true voice that we are often not very encouraged to think about it. I want people to feel like there is a voice in there, that it isn't just, oh, I just do this because I like was told, but that there is a voice in there, and kind of question, what is that voice? What does it really want? What is it really saying?
Yeah. Dr. Perry, he had said at one point, he's a PT out in Jersey, but at one point he said like the body only moves like 10% voluntary and the rest of it's like 90% would be involuntary. So like for every 10% you do, the rest of your body is like moving. So again, goes back to like the body just has so much more knowledge than we give it credit for.
Yeah.
And like we should just like tap into that a little bit more often. Like your work, it always taps into that so many different ways. But I think too, the other part with like intuitive versus smart, it's like so hard in society now because like I feel like we oftentimes are going for the smart goals or the goals in general. Like we're so goal driven that we always have to hit a goal. It's like an addiction in a way.
Yes.
Yeah. And like everyone's wearing an Apple Watch and they're like, I need to make sure I hit my steps. And if I didn't put my Apple Watch on basketball workout time, I'm not going to get the exact heart rate that that I have. Like, and I'm like, but did you like notice if you smiled more today or if you like laughed a little harder? Like, no, you didn't notice that, but you're just going to check your watch to see, it's not going to count your smiles. It's not going to count your laughs.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just like, oh, I don't like the intuitiveness is becoming lost. So I think this type of work is just so important to bring people back inside their body and be like, you don't need the $200 watch on your hand if you like, take a little time to just be with yourself.
Yeah, it's a lot of doing in this, you have to do. And like, if you just stop for a moment and just be who you are, then it's plenty. It's plenty just to be, like that's all real. That's enough. Like you shouldn't have to feel like there has to be 1,000 other things on top of that. You just being in this world is wonderful. Everyone,
Yeah. There's another concept of like we're always trying to go into the becoming. So like we're always becoming, but like when are we being?
Yeah.
Right? Like when are we just?
Yeah. And I love that there's the people, and I've stopped saying this. It's like I'm figuring it out. And I'm like, I'm not actually figuring it out. I've stopped.
I've stopped figuring it out.
I'm not figuring things out. Like for who? Like unless it's like, I guess if I have to like fix my stove or something that doesn't work, I need to figure it out in order to cook. But other than that, I'm like, I don't want to have to figure it out. And I don't think it's really gonna help me. Then I'm always like, I think it's good to have goals. Don't get me wrong, like but to have them just so we can check things off and like move forward, and and again, that's also a privilege, and I totally recognize that I am, not the majority of the world does not live the way that I do.
Yes.
And I do want to acknowledge that, but I just wish that the majority of the world that I live in that has the privilege, actually, like, if we could just step back a little bit and not always feel this like I have to. It's like, okay, for who? I don't understand.
Yeah, the figuring it out is funny too. That was like my phrase over COVID. I was always like, I'm just gonna figure it out. Like we got to figure it out. We were like throwing a bunch of kids in a room, and they were like, you got to teach them, and we're like, we play games with kids. They're like, no, you got to teach them. Like they're not in school, so good luck. And we had to figure it out. We formed classrooms. We had like for kindergarten through 8th grade. We had little classes. I bought like the books. We read them books. We wrote notes. We played games, movement games. But yeah, that's a whole other discussion. But COVID, yeah, definitely had us figuring things out, and that was a transitional period. But yeah, back to just like being is very important.
Yeah.
Just like being in this conversation with you.
Yeah.
Well, we've had a lot to talk about, but there's just a few more things. If that's okay. Yeah, okay. So one thing I thought was also interesting that we had discussed earlier about the body part. Like, what is your relation to that body part? And the fact that sometimes we only pay attention to a body part when we are in pain. And I found, like, I had an interesting realization in one of your classes where, like, you were like, oh, we're just going to choose a body part. And, like, I didn't know what body part I was going to choose until I stepped up to the pole and I heard the song. I ended up choosing heart. And, like, weirdly, like, I at that time, I was having issues and, like, a weirdness in my left shoulder that's just, like, from a long-term accident from when I was 18. I was hit by a car. So, like, just I've never felt like that mobility is to where I want it to be in a safe way. But anyways, so like the song played and I like felt like I was like trying to lift my heart in such a way and like really like expose it, which is also something somatically we usually cave in and like turn into to protect it. But the whole song, like I wasn't worried about like my shoulder engagement or like certain positions feeling weird or different. And I thought that was also just a beautiful realization to like sometimes when you're feeling pain or like a nagging, like to look at bringing out another side. Like maybe it's because you're holding something in on another side of you, whether it's heart, lungs, like the other muscles that exist in your body besides the
one that hurt.
the one that hurts. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you bring that up. Yeah, I mean, I love when people choose heart. It's just such a vulnerable place, but also such a beautiful, it's like that first, part, the first chakra of the body where we, it's like you in relation to the world and like what we sort of invite in and how we interact and it's just like this, even when we're meeting people, like, we express ourselves with our hands, the channel to our heart. There's just like so much there. So yeah, like being able to focus on being able to focus on individual body parts is really powerful because it does, you see that strength and the strength, not just for itself, but the strength that is, helping the rest of the body, like I think this also goes to, and this may just be me just reading, into my own journey, but sometimes when I haven't felt great, it's hard to reach out or trust that things are going to be okay or that someone else can hold you for a little bit. And the part of like, when we think about different body parts is we think about them, we interact with them, we kind of see what's our relationship to that body part in relation to the whole body. And if we think of that body part and perhaps the one that was like, we normally think about the one that, like in your case, the left shoulder that's like injured, right? Maybe that left shoulder is like, hey, I need someone to actually hold me. And the heart is like, I'll step up and do it. I got you, And that's, so we can think about that in life too, like if we think about the communities or, the constellations that you're part of, like sometimes it's hard to like lean into that and actually trust. But once we ask the person like, hey, I was like really going through a rough time right now. Like, do you think? And they're like, I got you. Like, I'll, don't worry about it. I'll go, grocery shop, whatever it is,
Yeah.
But it is building the relationship. We, again, like to like isolate things. And sometimes we have to for its protection. But once we can start having a conversation with different body parts, they have different ways that they can communicate.
So I actually found that was very interesting too, because I recently read this book called Connections, and a lot of it was based on like networking and how we like a lot of our social issues today is really based on networking, and how some people have a lot of networks, and whether it's through their parents or through their friends that they go to school with, or their family members, and some really suffer from weak networks. Um, and there was another book that I also just finished, which was about housewife, which is about like how, yeah, it's about how the name housewife has changed over the years. It's written by one of my clients and friends, Lisa Davis.
Oh.
So, but that book also talked about how like it was like family structures were easier back in the day when we were all connected. When we were all like interwoven, and again, like surrendering to each other's help and like leaning on each other, and like there's a lot of, I love how you bring what's happening into the body also into the community of like on a larger scale, this is what's not happening. Like we're not leaning on each other, we're not using each other for our resources, and like it happens within us, but it's also happening on such a grand scale too. Whereas like we have such power through networks and connection. We we unfortunately are like not really taking advantage of the social networks in a positive way at the moment. um which is like really cool. One of the book was Connected, which is really, yeah, it was just a lot of research on how much our social like connections play into like our outcomes.
Yeah. Because today we kind of use our networks as something to like propel us forward versus something that, kind of, if we think about it, just that we should, feeling just good. You know what I mean? Like, because again, we're like a very forward driven society of like, go, go, go. So like your connections is usually the ones that like pulling you forward. But the society loves to tell you that if something happens to you, if you're, something goes wrong, then it's your responsibility.
Yes.
You should figure it out.
Yes.
You and you alone. Not leaning on anyone else, not asking for anything. But if you do great things, then it's like, but why don't you reach out to this person and this person and this person? You're like, when I feel like shit, it's actually when I need some help. But because we've been really drilled to like figure it out. And that's, the same thing with injuries. Like when we treat injuries, we want to look at the whole body, right? Like we can't just like we do physical therapy and this, but we actually do, you do physical therapy of your whole body to make sure that you're not going to overcompensate so that injury is going to get worse, right? So you have to relearn a lot of things so that you can, rebuild the whole thing, not just like the shoulder or the head. Yeah. And that is very much like I wish that we could do that also in society.
It would be wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you have some great ideas, starting with adoption.
Yeah, totally.
Definitely check out Anna's future research for adoption as well, which will be really cool. We can definitely talk about that at the end before we sign up. But real quick, one other thing that I think would be cool for you to discuss is like your like the concept of like giving yourself permission and permission to, whether it's feel or be, express, or like just permission nowadays. I think that's a cool concept that that you could talk about?
Yeah. I mean, when I think of permission, I think of, allowing myself or just giving myself this permission to really show up for myself the way that I feel like I want to show up for myself and for others and in the world, but also to feel like there's like this, you know, we feel things and it goes through our body and then we kind of, we digest it, it goes out and like the body itself takes what it needs from that like experience. And I think oftentimes we don't want to feel, and I'm not sure why. um, or we think of feelings or feeling things or being emotional of being very extreme, either like really, really sad or really, really, happy.
Yeah.
There's like so much in between. So if we just give ourselves the permission to not hold so hard to things, but to really be able to like float through. And just because you left one emotion doesn't mean that it's never going to come back. Obviously, like it's going to come back. So permission to be able to exist in more than one kind of not even level, but like the things are and it's not like oh it's this or this, it's like this and this,
right?
Like giving yourself the permission to, let's say like a lot of times if you feel grief or sadness, there is this really some really heavy things, but it's not just like oh there is like also can be spurts of joy in there, it can be very surprising if we really allow ourselves to feel, and not necessarily feel and hold on to the feeling, but feel and we observe and this is what's happening. And then, trust that we are going to be able to move on. It can come back to us. We'll deal with it then. But a lot of times I think we're just so people, again, going back to this body fixation, it's like, I would love if we could talk about the body of like how it functions, how it serves us on an everyday basis, all of the knowledge and having the permission to take a moment out of the day and just like, I'm just going to lay and do absolutely nothing and just let the body figure it out. And then I'm just going to keep moving. Those are really important.
Yeah.
Like, especially when you learn something new or you have a conversation that's maybe really hard or you're preparing to have a conversation that's really hard. Like you need to kind of like step away and kind of like, okay, let me just not even think about what I'm going to say. Let me just let the body just kind of figure it out and then we'll see.
Yeah.
So that permission is important for me.
It's so funny that you bring that up at the end, at the like last piece, because as you're saying, like the ability to float in between emotions and like say it's this and that is, I feel like very important, like a very good skill to have when you're having hard discussions, like to be able to relate to someone, like even though you're not experiencing the same life or that's not your life, like yeah, that's not your life experience.
Yeah.
It's not your lived experience, as my friend would say. But the ability to float in and out is like that, bringing that empathy, that awareness, that like underlying listening back into the conversation. I think that's like beautiful, as well as like the permission to just like also just be with your body and just do what your body wants to do, or like just listening to that, and whether it's like really sad or really happy or really wiggly. It's like, oh, like no one wants to wiggle anymore in space, but like they'll do jumping jacks. Like I'll sit here and do jumping jacks, but like God forbid you wiggle or like do some undulations. Like, which I mean, there's a whole other discussion on permission as well, like undulations and giving like the full spinal movement, especially for women, because it can be very like provocative, or like seen as like you're wanting to draw attention to yourself. And like there's a lot with like that in like different social spaces outside of like a pole studio. But like just allowing your body to like let yourself like do some stuff that feels good. Because it's like
it's
needed.
important. Yeah. It is also important to just kind of get to know your body. I say this all the time in class. I'm like, just take your time. Like, what does it feel like? Like, you know what it's supposed to look like, so now you got it. But like, what does it feel like? Like, does it feel good? Does it hurt? Is it this? Is it that? And I think a lot of times we're so detached from our bodies that the idea of even like, that's why I love the prompt of like the different body parts, because you're like, oh, like I have a right knee. I didn't really realize that, you know what I mean? And you just kind of go body part by body part. And I think it's really just for anyone. Like, we have a body. Sometimes I'm like, how did you get up from the bed to the bathroom this morning? You must have felt something. Your body must have told you, given you some sort of
signal.
Yeah, signals. But we're so taught to not think about those things. So it's we're such a verbal, but not sound making, but a verbal verbal like words are very, you should know, you should be able to say this, that you're either for or you're against, or it's very much like you have to define things. But the body doesn't work like that. It's like very fluid. It just goes in between, and you can be happy one moment and not happy the other, and feel really lots of energy and not feel, I mean, like that whole thing. Where I don't know, I'm just curious about what's that inner dance that you're talking about all the time. So
especially like even hormone changes, you're like, your body's just like, oh wow, there's so many feelings right now.
So many feelings, and then like that is what I mean. Like that would be a whole different conversation. But growing older, like it's very different moving and dancing being 47 versus 30 versus 20 versus 14. Right. And what does that do? And like, what are the ways that we are? How do I have to keep the curiosity going, and just creating a new awareness of my body. And it's really interesting. So I mean, I really, I don't know, some people probably don't like it. I really like it. I really enjoy it. And aging for me it's again, I'm privileged in many ways, and I also don't have any, I don't have pain. I don't have all of those things. So that makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, so there's this person, Katie Bowman, who talks about like, a lot of people say, don't move it, you lose it. But like, she reframes things and she'll say like, care for it to keep it. And so she's like going through bodily changes, and she's like, I can't wait to write a book on menopause as I do all this research, because there's not much research about the women's body at this stage, and like what movements are good for it, or needed more so entering these stages, or I mean, she's done a lot of research like for youth development, and like just like one of her books is like Move Your DNA, so that's like for everybody. But there's this extended research that's needed for like these deep hormonal changes that go on too, and like noticing your inner dance changing, right? Like
sure.
And I mean, women's health in general is just so far behind because they've not wanted to perform like a lot of experiments on women because of our ability to give birth for years. So we're really far behind. And also there's just like not enough understanding to the changes that women go through with like.
Yeah, because the people, I mean, I always say this even when I like teach people, like always check your resources, because ask yourself, who did the research?
Yeah.
And who did they do the research on? And where did those people live? Because most likely with, there's going to be men doing research on women's bodies in many different, that you're like, okay, this doesn't make no sense. You haven't even lived in this body. You have like no concept.
Yeah, I mean, that was like a whole chapter in the Housewife book, was like on all the medication that they put women through in like the 1920s, 1940s, 1970s even. Like, I mean, diagnosing women with hysteria and hystera having a root word meaning uterus, like it's you only women were hysteric. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, there's just a lot of history that's just and like not understanding the female body. I feel like still needs to be unraveled.
Absolutely. And not even just and that hasn't even touched on, racial inequality in
Right.
a way that, Black women have been, used for various experiments and research, again, quotation marks. And, so that it's just like, it's a field that, again, is just so, cis male dominated. I'm like, yeah, it'd be cool if we could just move this around in a different direction. Yeah.
Yeah. So we could talk forever because we already were talking for like 2 hours before this call. And we've had wonderful conversations, some based on facial expressions, some based on like dental awareness. I mean, we could go on and on, but like maybe we'll have another conversation another day.
Yeah.
But we can cut this today. Real quick before we end, can you tell the listeners like what's your next biggest project, or your adventure that you're going to share?
No.
Okay. It's a secret. I love that.
Yes, I can't tell you just yet, but I will tell you soon.
Okay. Well,
Yes.
stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned.
Go to our website.
Totally, go to my website. But you can, if you're interested in Unstructured, you come to my class. You can also take my mentorship program if you're a movement facilitator who wants to broaden your work in prompt-based work and learning how to work with different bodies and different people in movement and what that means to hold space and to create space with and for a diversity of bodies. So if you're interested in that, I'll be happy to have you. If my mentorship program, hopefully I'll run the next one this summer. It's like a 10-week program. So small, like 3 to 4 people. And it's like very hands-on type of mentorship that I provide.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm
Come to
definitely
class.
going to be interested in that. And yes, come to class.
Yes.
I'm going to try to make as many of your classes as I can. And well, it's been a wonderful conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Do you want to say anything else to the audience? Is there anywhere else you'd like them to find you? Your website, we can put in the bio.
Website should be it.
Okay. All right. Well, come to Incredible Unstructured class on Friday, 6:15.
Yes.
Join us. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for having me.
All right.